Good morning. My name is Karen Wills Henry, and I am the great-great-great-granddaughter of Daniel Gant of the Maryland 9th Regiment, United States Colored Troops. How many of you here today have heard of Alex Haley? I'd venture to say that most family historians, especially African Americans, have been inspired by his story. Many take up genealogy in the hopes of replicating this feat. I know I did. I had always had a great yearning to know about my African ancestors. As a child, I would spend hours staring at pictures in the World Book Encyclopedia or National Geographic magazines, trying to find a face that looked like me. When I was in high school, I signed up for an honors course in African culture, when our teacher, Ms. Joyner, told us about Mr. Alex Haley and his amazing research. This was after a few years prior to the book publication and the miniseries. And I thought, really, is it just that simple? My poor mother. I often wonder what she must have been thinking when I came charging in the house demanding to know the story of my African heritage. But she sat with me and told me what she could. That afternoon, I learned my maternal grandmother's name was Melvina Denton, and she had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, but only she and her youngest brother had any children. She died when my mother was just 16, the age I was at the time. She told me Melvina's mother was named Annie Gant Denton, and she had 3 sisters, Mary Gant Spears, Florence Gant Ball, and Alberta Gant Waters. She also told me that their father's name was Thomas Gant. She knew her great-grandfather and remembered summertime visits to his farm in Calvert County, Maryland, where the little white children would chase her and her uncle away with sticks and stones for having the temerity of sharing the same surname of Denton. She told me that Thomas Gant had never been a slave, and the land the farm was on was a gift from his master upon the occasion of his marriage. She never knew her great-grandmother, but was given to understand that she was Native American. My reaction was pretty much, okay, but who was my African ancestor? To which my mother responded, I don't know about Africa. I think my great-grandfather's people came from North Carolina. Well, obviously, I was doing something wrong. Frustrated, but not yet hopeless, I took my scanty notes, put them in her grandmother's family Bible, and put them in a very safe place. Ironically, just 2 years later, the year Roots was finally published, my mother passed away. Now, come forward with me 10 years, and I'm at the Smithsonian Museum visiting the Field to Factory exhibit with my sisters and grandmother. This was my father's mother, and the only grandparent we actually ever knew. We were teasing her about her long and arduous journey from South Howard County, Maryland to North Baltimore City when she was just a toddler. She laughs along and then says, I always hated summer because all of my friends would go down south and I would be left sitting on the stoop all by myself. My sisters and I looked at each other in amazement and then hugged her in commiseration, remembering our own summers spent entertaining one another because all of our friends were down the country visiting Big Mom and them. Then I started to wonder, just how long have the Wills girls been spending lonely summers sitting on the stoops and porches of Baltimore City? But what do you do if you're not Alex Haley and your family has been blessed with longevity and a rich oral history? And let's not forget that stipend from Reader's Digest. So what do you do if you don't have all those things in your favor? What if you're just plain Karen Wills? How do you begin? Well, to paraphrase a very popular high-tech company, there's a book for that. So the first thing I did was go to the library and pretty much decimate call number 929. All of these books instructed me to begin at home with personal records and interviews. But my mother's closest living relative was her uncle, who was 2 years younger than her, and he knew even less about the family than I did. And that family Bible, the one I put in a very safe place, was now lost. Eventually, I sat down and wrote out all that I could remember from that long ago conversation with my mother. Then I transferred that information onto a pedigree chart. I was nearly devastated by all the blank spaces. It was then that I decided to modify my goals a bit. First, I would identify all of my mother's grandparents. Then I would find my African ancestor. To start filling in the blanks, I went to the Maryland Hall of Records in Annapolis. Here you will find all of the records for the state of Maryland, all its counties, and the city of Baltimore. Maryland began recording vital statistics in 1898, Baltimore City in 1875. Statewide marriage records are available from 1914. At the Ed Pratt Free Library in Baltimore City, I found the family in the city directories and looked for death notices in the old Baltimore News Post. These led me to church and cemetery records. Along with census records, I was now filling in a lot of the blank spaces and getting a better picture of this family. However, I had actually not gone back any further than great-great-grandfather Thomas Gant of Calvert County, Maryland. Then, following up on a tip I read, that if you had a male ancestor that you suspect to be the right age to have served in the Civil War, you should check the military records. To make things just a little easier, the wonderful folks at the Maryland Hall of Records had made a card index for every soldier that served in a Maryland regiment. There were 6 regiments that were part of the USCT, the 4th, 7th, 9th, 19th, 30th, and 39th. Searching the index, I wrote the name of every Gant that served in one of the Maryland regiments of the USCT. There were only 3, Andrew, Daniel, and Somerset Gant. Now it was back to the National Archives. Once I reviewed the pension files, I had no doubt that Daniel Gant was my ancestor, because included in that file was correspondence from Thomas Gant and his daughter Mary Spears at addresses I had already confirmed through census records and city directories. So, from the pension file and other military records available at the archives, I was able to discover a few things about the life and death of my great-great-great-grandfather. Daniel Gant was born in Calvert County, Maryland about 1834. He was a slave of Basil A. Duke. Sometime in the winter of 1858, Daniel received permission from his master to marry Mary Ireland, who belonged to James Duke, a cousin of Basil Duke. It was a regular slave marriage with no officiant, just a small supper at James Duke's place. The couple was then allowed to live together as man and wife on Basil Duke's place. Their first child, Thomas, was born after Christmas the following year, either December 1859 or January 1860. A daughter, Mary Catherine, was born in June 1861. The last of their 3 children, James, was born April 2nd, 1863. Mary was attended at each of these births by Belinda Mason, a midwife. On October 22nd, 1863, Daniel Gant arrived at Brown's Farm, Calvert County, Maryland, where he enlisted in the Union Army, Company B of the 9th Regiment, United States Colored Infantry. He had at least 3 visitors at Camp Stanton in Benedict, Maryland. Basil Duke apparently went to identify his property. In Maryland, slave owners were paid $300 for every able-bodied slave that enlisted. When Gant saw James Duke, he asked him to take care of his wife Mary until he returned. James Duke considered Gant to be a fine boy. Mary Gant saw her husband only once after he enlisted. He was in his Union Army uniform as befitted a sergeant in the USCT. He assured his wife he would return. When he enlisted, Daniel Gant gave his age as 29. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall, chestnut brown with black hair and black eyes. He was considered to be hale, healthy, and fit for service. March 1894, the regiment left Benedict, Maryland for South Carolina, where they were attached to the District of Hilton Head, South Carolina. In July of 1864, while on duty in St. John's Island, Sergeant Gant became sick with fever. He never fully recovered. In September of that year, his rank was reduced to private because he was now considered to be unfit for duty due to his illness. He died at Balfour General Hospital, Fortress Monroe, Portsmouth, Virginia. Daniel Gant never returned home. He is buried at Hampton National Cemetery. Daniel Gant's name can be found on plaque A21 of the African American Civil War Memorial. My quest for my roots has been frustrating, thrilling, and extremely rewarding, not just for me, but for my entire family. I have been able to identify not just my mother's 4 grandparents, but all of her 8 great-grandparents as well. I haven't found my African ancestry yet, but I still have hope. My name is Karen Wills Henry, and my ancestors shed blood, sweat, and tears so that I may stand here today. Thank you.